Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. Get updates to the forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that you might have out for the state. And you can also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. Get updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Starting off, we will take a look. We have quite a few warnings and advisories out for much of mainland Alaska. Along the west coast, we have blizzard warnings from the Kuskokwim Delta all the way up through the Chukchi Sea coastline, and that does include St. Lawrence Island as well. These blizzard warnings are currently in effect and will last into Wednesday morning. Now, we do have some winter weather advisories as we move further to the east. So we are going to start to see those as we get closer towards the Grayling area, stretching up all the way up towards the Ambler area. These are all going to last out into Wednesday as well. But as we get further to the east into the central and eastern portions of the interior, extending up by the Yukon Flats area as well, we have some more winter weather advisories for snow and blowing snow. These are going to start to last until Thursday morning as we do expect the conditions to progress from the west to the east. So those blizzard warnings will be the first to start to expire, and those winter weather advisories out east are going to expire the latest. Now, all of these are out for blowing snow. Some areas will also see some snow amounts accompanied with that blowing snow. Along the coastline, we do expect those visibilities to drop down to quarter mile or less. Sometimes we will see whiteout conditions. And then for the winter weather advisories for snow and blowing snow, those visibilities will drop down to a half mile or less at times. Again, these are going to start to expire tomorrow morning for some of the most farther west ones, and then into Thursday as we get further to the east. As we look at our satellite imagery, we can see the system out over the Bering Sea right now, pushing cloud cover out over the west coast of the state. That's the one that's bringing in those blizzard conditions all along the west coast. You can see the front tapering back through much of the southern Bering Sea, as well as some cloud cover extending out over the Pribilof Islands as well as the Aleutians. And as we look back to the eastern portions of the mainland, a weak upper level wave is pushing through. That's bringing in some snow to the far eastern mainland. And then finally down in the eastern portions of the Gulf of Alaska, we can see another system pushing in towards the Panhandle area, bringing some precipitation to that area as well. As we look at the weather for the remainder of the day, we'll stay out in the Gulf of Alaska with that system out there, bringing in some precipitation off those Gulf waters, primarily rain as we get to the more southern locations, and then more snow as we get farther to the north. We're going to see that lighter snow extend up over the eastern portions of the mainland, but the heavier stuff is going to be from that system out over the Bering Sea as we're pushing in that frontal system through St. Lawrence Island area now. It's going to quickly be arriving into the west coast. We are seeing some of the heavier snow as well as the blowing snow conditions, again extending up with those blizzard conditions from the Kuskokwim Delta area up the west coast through the Chukchi Sea coastline as well. This front will drape through much of the central and southern Bering, bringing in some warmer temperatures to the Aleutian Islands. We are expecting some rain for the central Aleutians, but behind the front it's going to be a little bit colder. They're expecting some snow to be around the western Aleutian Islands. As we move into tonight, that front will push a little bit farther to the east. We will still see some warmer air by the central Aleutian Islands starting to make their way into the eastern Aleutians as well, with a mixture of rain and snow there. But for the mainland, we are going to have that front push into the west coast tonight, still bringing in those blowing snow conditions through the west coast, starting to push into the western interior as well, with some of the leading edges of snow making it into the central interior. That snow is going to extend down to the Bristol Bay area as well as covering Kodiak Island. As we look out over the Panhandle area, our low pressure has pushed farther to the east, bringing some snow throughout much of the Panhandle area. Just those most southern locations will see that mix with rain and snow. And that snow will also extend out by the Yakutat area. As we move into Wednesday, that low continues to push off farther to the east, resulting in a mixture of rain and snow for much of the Panhandle area. Again, at higher elevations and areas farther to the north, we are expecting primarily snow. Out over mainland Alaska, our low is now over the Point Hope area, but we are still going to see some blowing snow conditions along the west coast. We do expect that to diminish as we move throughout the day on Wednesday. However, we'll have some more snow and blowing snow as we look farther to the east into the central and eastern interior. Some of that snowfall also making into the Alaska Range and up along the Arctic coastline. We'll also have snow extending down all of the west coast into the Bristol Bay area and down to Kodiak Island, but still a little bit warmer in the southern Bering, where we will see a mixture of rain and snow for the eastern Aleutian Islands as well as the Alaska Peninsula. However, colder out west, western Aleutians should see some snow with a new low coming in the far western Bering Sea. As we move into Thursday, another front will be pushing through the central Bering Sea, bringing a mixture of Snow showers out ahead of it with some heavier snow behind it. That snow is going to extend down to the western Aleutian Islands, and we will have snow along the southwest coastline extending in through the mainland. Much of mainland Alaska will be under snow on Thursday. We'll see snow from south central up through all of the interior and the Arctic coastline, where we will also have some areas of blowing snow up along the Arctic coast. Down in the southeastern portions of the state, northern locations of the Panhandle, we'll see some snow, and there'll be a little bit more rain as we get farther to the south, but also drying out a little bit in the southern locations of the Panhandle. As we move into our temperatures starting Wednesday morning for the Panhandle area, we are going to drop down into the mid-30s in southern locations, mid-20s up to the north, staying in the 20s along the North Gulf Coast to include Kodiak Island, near 20 degrees as we get to the Cook Inlet area, and then going below zero for the Copper River Basin. Up in the interior, single digits for most southern locations, starting to get below zero as we get by Bettles and up into the Brooks Range, up along the Arctic coastline, -10 for Mukjagvik to the east, and then it's staying in the positive single digits for much of the west coast of the Arctic. Down the west coast of much of the rest of the state, around 10 degrees warmer at St. Lawrence Island. Down in southwest Alaska, we are going to see teens for most interior locations, near 20 as we get by the water, near 30 degrees for the Alaska Peninsula, and mid-30s for much of the Aleutian Islands and Pribilofs. For our afternoon highs on Wednesday, we're starting off in the Panhandle area, near 40 degrees for southern locations, upper 30s areas to the north, 30s for much of south central Alaska, staying a little bit cooler in the Copper River Basin. Up in the interior, 20s out east, getting to near 30 for much of the western locations. Up north, a little bit cooler, staying near 20 degrees as we get closer towards the Brooks Range, single digits through the Brooks Range, and then along the Arctic coastline near 10 degrees until we get to the west coast where things will be a little bit warmer. For the Seward Peninsula, we do expect the mid-20s, and then down in southwest Alaska, near freezing to just above, and then in the upper 30s for the Aleutian Islands. For our Thursday morning lows in the Panhandle area in the lower 30s in southern locations, 20s up north, and the 20s for much of south central Alaska. In the interior, many places will see teens warmer in the south, getting colder as we get farther to the north. Up along the Arctic coastline, near 0 degrees, some places will drop below zero, single digits for much of the west coast. Southwest Alaska will be near 20 degrees, warming up to near 30 for the Bristol Bay area, and then the lower to mid-30s for the Aleutian Islands. For our Thursday afternoon high temperatures in the Panhandle, in the lower 40s for the southern locations, and to the mid to upper 30s at northern locations, into the 30s for much of south central Alaska, 42 degrees for Kodiak. In the interior, we're going to see temperatures primarily in the 20s, a little bit warmer there for Delta Junction and at Fairbanks at 30 degrees. Up along the Arctic coastline, single digits out west, into the teens as we get far enough to the east. Along the west coast of the state, Kotzebue Sound area near 10 degrees, and near 20 degrees as we get to the Northern Sound area. Southwest Alaska near 30 degrees for the YK Delta, mid-30s for Bristol Bay, and then the mid to upper 30s for the Aleutian Islands and Pribilof Islands.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Now it's time for the aviation weather segment of our show. The flying weather for Wednesday morning shows an extensive area of IFR conditions across the western half of the state out into the eastern Bering Sea and central Aleutians. This is associated with a weakening occluded front. There's also some IFR conditions, especially the inner waterways of the southeast, including the coastal mountains there, and a little pocket in the northeast. As we go through Wednesday afternoon, conditions should improve along the lower Yukon Valley, but remain IFR, especially the western part of the Brooks Range into the northwest and portions of the southwest peninsula out over into the eastern Aleutians. On Thursday morning, we'll still see pretty extensive areas of IFR across the northwest, west central, and southwest parts of the state, with an area of IFR in the eastern interior in the Yukon Valley there. On Thursday afternoon, those areas will diminish a bit, still lingering though along the Brooks Range into parts of the North Slope, as well as the southeast mainland and the southeast peninsula, and also over parts of the southwest. So past conditions on Wednesday, Anaktuvik is expected to remain IFR throughout the day, as will Adigan. And then as we head a little farther south and west, Lake Clark and Merrill will see MVFR conditions become IFR conditions, with IFR conditions likely much of the time on Wednesday and the west entrances of these passes. As we head further a little bit toward the north and northwest, rainy paths IFR to MVFR, and windy paths should remain generally IFR throughout the day Wednesday. Farther east, Isabel, MVFR, and Metasta will see VFR conditions become MVFR by Wednesday afternoon. Tanita should generally be MVFR, and further south there at Portage, we are looking at MVFR conditions. And finally, in the southeast, Chilkoot and White Passage should hold MVFR throughout the day Wednesday. And I look at the freezing levels. Freezing levels are near the surface along the inner waterways of the southeast, along the south central coast to just off of Kodiak Island, then back out over the central Bering. Ahead of that occluded front, we are looking for a little higher freezing levels above 4,000 feet off the tip of the Alaska Peninsula and briefly maxing out at around 6,000 to 8,000 feet there in the eastern Aleutians. As far as icing potential in the southeast, we are looking for above 6,000 feet. For the Alaska Peninsula and southwest, above 4,000 feet in that area extending out into the eastern Bering Sea. And for the west and northwest, we are looking generally above 3,000 feet, the potential for some isolated moderate icing. Well, pretty impressive upper level jet stream wind map for Wednesday. We have a 150 to 170 knot northwesterly winds covering much of the southern half of the state into the southeast peninsula. And notice the curve to it, we call that anticyclonic curvature because of the ridging that extends south of that from the Gulf into the North Pacific. Going down to 9,000 feet, we're seeing winds in northern Alaska generally on the order of 30 to 40 knots out of the west. However, there is that higher level winds beneath the upper level jet core, maxing out around 70 knots over Kodiak Island there from the west to northwest. And then as we come down to 3,000 feet, continue to see those stronger winds still around 40 to near 50 knots over the southwest peninsula into the eastern Aleutians. Whereas in the north, there is a weak low circulation along the northwest coast with winds south of that generally around 30 to 35 knots. And then finally, as we get out on over toward the southeast peninsula along the coast there, winds of 40 to 45 knots from the northwest. And a check of turbulence. We do expect the best chance of some turbulence there over portions of the southwest into the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians. Generally, we are looking for turbulence below 4,000 feet from interior areas through the Alaska Peninsula, but we could see some pockets of turbulence below 3,000 feet, St. Lawrence Island, as well as the central and eastern Aleutians. So that does it for your aviation weather.
Leatherbacks are the largest turtles on Earth, growing up to 7 feet long and weighing more than 2,000 pounds. These sea turtles are among the most highly migratory animals on Earth, some traveling up to 10,000 miles a year between their nesting and feeding grounds. Prevalent in every ocean except the Arctic and Antarctic, the species overall is declining, more so in the Pacific. In the eastern Pacific, the Mexican population was once thought to be the largest in the world and has experienced an alarming decline.
This trajectory of decline that we've seen and actually collapse. We're talking about only 20 or 30 turtles nesting every year, where thousands used to just 40 years ago. That's the kind of dramatic decline.
The western Pacific population has been declining steadily, and it's particularly critical to act now before it collapses, while there are enough turtles in nests to respond to conservation measures. But threats to all leatherbacks in the Pacific need to be addressed.
The top threats to populations are uncontrolled coastal development, all the bad stuff on the nesting beaches, egg harvest, poaching of the females, predation on the eggs by dogs and pigs. Deforestation makes the sand too warm and dry and the eggs don't hatch. Another one is incidental capture in fishing gear. During their vast migrations, they get caught in fishing gear throughout the Pacific. And finally, marine debris, which the leatherbacks mistake for their favorite food, jellyfish, and they choke on those.
Protecting leatherbacks in U.S. waters alone is not enough to ensure the continued existence of the species. The highly migratory nature of Pacific leatherbacks requires cooperation and international collaboration. NOAA is focusing on partnerships with Mexico, Central America, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands in the Pacific.
Our action plan promotes a holistic recovery strategy that addresses all the sources of mortality. So that's basically ensuring that the remaining nesting sites are protected. And the nests produce as many hatchlings as possible. And then secondly, in tandem with that, is reducing the fisheries-related mortalities. We're working with international partners to incentivize community participation on the nesting beach conservation and developing alternative livelihood programs that wean communities off leatherback resources and introduce alternative methods for food and income. Recovery is going to take a long time, on the order of 20 to 30 years at least, before we see some of these actions bear fruit. But here in the US, we can all help leatherbacks by making seafood choices, for instance, that support sustainable fishing practices. And beachgoers can certainly do their part by keeping our oceans clean of plastic debris, picking up marine litter, particularly plastic bags.
Together with our partners, we are strengthening protection and conservation efforts to ensure a future for leatherbacks, helping them to survive and once again thrive in the waters of the Pacific Ocean.
For over 40 years, NOAA scientists have been collecting data and piecing together the story of the gray whale. Each year, new discoveries are made, revealing the secrets of this ancient traveler. With the northeastern Pacific population recovered, leading scientists from the NOAA Southwest Fisheries Science Center continue their research efforts to help save the western population from extinction. The most effective way to identify individuals and count the population is to photograph them from the surface. Using the gray whale's distinctive markings and gray spots caused by parasites on their skin, scientists document these characteristics to identify individuals.
So we're able to track migratory pathways and corridors by the simple use of photo identification. There are other ways to do that as well, biopsy sampling and genetics.
And from the air.
Aerial photography is one way you can study animals based on their size and shape. So you can learn a lot about nutritive and reproductive condition of whales just by measuring their size and shape from vertical aerial photographs.
You can also put satellite transmitters on them and track them remotely. You put the transmitter on and let them go, and you watch them move across the Pacific or down to China or wherever it might be.
To further learn and discover where these great sojourners swim, the team of researchers traveled to Russia and set up camp on Sakhalin Island.
The main focus of our research while we were on Sakhalin was to collect photo identification. If it was a whale that we had not collected a genetic sample from previously, we would also attempt to collect a sample from the whales.
Whereas whales are endowed with natural insulation, their human observers must gear up to brave the cold in order to study these marine giants up close.
We're typically only able to work about 1/3 of the time that we're there, and that's mostly due to this fog that just invades the area and sits sometimes for weeks on end. So it can be very challenging to try and do field work in this site.
Recently, 2 whales from the western population surprised scientists by migrating across the Pacific to the waters of California and Mexico.
It's a really fun finding. It's added another piece to the puzzle that we didn't previously know about. And I would have to say that it's opened up more questions than we had before.
Research scientists from Japan, Russia, and the United States share images of animals they've spotted.
We take a photograph of an individual off of Sakhalin Island, and we get a phone call from Japanese scientists, and they say, hey, guess what? We've got a picture of a gray whale in Japan. We say, can you send it to us? We'd love to try and match it. They'll send us the picture, we'll compare it to our catalog, and they'll say, hey, we've got a match from Sakhalin to Japan.
Unlike many species of whales that still remain on the endangered species list, the eastern Pacific gray whale, once on the brink of extinction, now numbers about 20,000 individuals. Recovery efforts that started 40 years ago and the ongoing research and monitoring by NOAA scientists have contributed to the conservation of the gray whales. Together, with legal protection and public education, scientists are playing their part to ensure the survival of this magnificent migratory animal.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and we'll conclude our show with the marine weather. Today's sea ice edge extends through the central Bering Sea with also off the southwest coast, but more importantly, what has happened, we have an occluded front that has worked its way into western Alaska, and that has caused the ice to shift northward by about 20 nautical miles, and we'll continue to see that trend tomorrow into Thursday. It will not be until early next week on Monday or Tuesday that another weather system will allow the ice to advance southward again. In the meantime, though, Wednesday's marine weather forecast for the southeast peninsula, the inner waterways, generally northwesterly winds at around 10 to 15 knots. Waves a few feet from Lynn Canal south to Petersburg, but upwards to 8 feet at Dixon Entrance. And along the coast, we're looking at west to northwest winds 25 to 30 knots and waves running 12 to 14 feet. On Thursday, the inner waterways winds will have a southerly component to them, 10 to as high as 25 knots upwards north of Juneau to Skagway, with waves running 3 to as high as 5 feet. The coastal areas will generally have westerly winds around 20 knots and waves 8 or 9 feet. On Wednesday, south central areas, including Prince William Sound, we'll see westerly winds at 30 knots, 6-footers. Off the Kenai and northeast of Kodiak Island, westerly winds 30 to 35 knots, waves 9 to 12 feet. And Cook Inlet, southwest winds 20 knots, waves 5 to near 6 feet. And then on Thursday, easterly winds will set up in Prince William Sound around 10 knots with waves running only around 2 or 3 feet. Generally, though, southwest to west winds, Cook Inlet and off the Kenai and Kodiak Island at 20 to 25 knots. Waves 8 to 9 feet in the Gulf waters, but 4 to 5 feet mouth of Cook Inlet. And for Wednesday, for Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, winds will generally be from the southwest at around 30 knots. On the Pacific side, waves 8 feet. On the Bering side, the highest waves will be running upwards 14 feet just north of Cold Bay. And then on Thursday, winds will come down a bit. They're still, though, around 25 knots around Kodiak Island with waves running around 8 feet. On the Bering side, west winds 20 knots and waves 6 to 11 feet. The Aleutian chain on Wednesday will start out with southwest winds 30 to 35 knots in the east side, with waves running around 15 feet or so. And then those winds are going to turn more to the west on Thursday, generally around 20 to 25 knots. Waves on the Pacific side running around 10 feet. On the Bering side, 10 feet as well. And once you get west of Adak, waves will be running 12 to as high as 15 feet. Across the ice pack of the west coast, we are going to see southwest winds of 25 to 30 knots on Wednesday, so there still will be some blowing snow, although winds will not be nearly as strong as what they were on Tuesday today. And for St. Paul and St. George, southwest winds 25 knots, waves running 14 feet. On Thursday, look for westerly winds at St. Paul and St. George with waves around 9 feet, and the ice areas will see winds turn more to the west following that frontal passage as it has moved inland. And we are looking at winds at around 10 to 15 knots then over the ice. For the Arctic coast, winds will be southeast to east at around 15 knots. Stronger winds, though, turn around to the southwest once you get south there of Cape Lisburne, especially Kotzebue Sound and down toward Nome. Southwest winds 25 to 30 knots with blowing snow tomorrow. And then on Thursday, more northerly winds from Prudhoe Bay westward at 20 knots, and we'll see that trend going down the coast, either north or northwest at around 15 to 20 knots for Thursday. Well, here is the weather map for tonight. Low pressure, far eastern Russia will have an occluded front moving into western Alaska, producing blizzard conditions, considerable blowing snow and lighter falling snow that'll spread inland across the interior. And on Wednesday, widespread snow, especially across along north of the Alaska Range in the interior, with some areas of blowing snow continuing in the west. And on Thursday, we still have some troughiness lingering in along the Brooks Range, as well as the Kenai down toward Kodiak Island, with another weaker occluded front approaching from the west. So that does it for our show today. Again, thank you for watching and have a pleasant evening.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.